Welcome to East Lansing Special Regular Council Meeting, Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. We'll begin with roll call.
Councilmember Brookover.
Here.
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
Here.
Mayor Bacon.
Present. I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilperson Watson, second by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Oppose? Agenda carries. Next up, communication from the audience. Begin with Jeffrey. I'll go with Jeffrey first. Did I call you out?
No, I didn't see anybody else, and I didn't want you to just pass the whole.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Sometimes people conclude there isn't anybody.
No, we got you.
Here.
You go. You go.
I'll fill out a card when I finish.
You go.
I just didn't want to miss the opportunity. You've got a lot of important things on your agenda tonight. I wanted to talk about the ballot question provisions, and also, if there's time, talk about the Evergreen property issue. On the ballot questions, the first one is about changing the date on which new members are sworn in from the week after the election to January. Clearly, the week after the election doesn't work anymore because of change in the counting of absentee ballots and the need for the vote to be certified after that. So there's no question there's a need for a change. I am not sure that there's a need to move to January. If the state law mandates that, then of course we have to do it. If it's simply that we have to allow enough time for certification, I suggest that we really think about waiting 2 weeks or something like that after the election for the swearing in, rather than all the way to January. And when I think about it, all of us who live in East Lansing elect people for 3 legislative bodies: the Congress at the federal level, the state legislature, and the city council. And I would be surprised if any of us are.
And the county commission.
That is true. I'm going to just pursue the way I was making, but you're absolutely right. I would be really surprised if folks are sitting around at their dining room table saying, I would really like one more of those legislative bodies that I elect to have lame duck sessions when some of the members that I elect have no accountability to voters anymore. I don't think that's something people are yearning for. I don't think that's an improvement in the way to do business. I think accountability ultimately is by election. And if people who are no longer going to hold the office then have almost 2 months to keep passing laws, I think that's a bug in our system, not something that is beneficial. So I would not want to move in that direction unless it's required. So I would keep it short to the, so that it accomplishes what must be, but not extend it longer. Regarding the number of council members, the idea of increasing from 5 to 7. We've had 5 for a long time. Sometimes it's nice to feel like I can get to know 5 people somewhat and have a sense of all of you. But I think there are some downsides over the years that I've noticed. Sometimes it really quickly comes down to there's one swing vote. And sometimes even 2 people practically have controlled a council. Have had just a great deal of power over what's going to get on the agenda, what will have, when will we have hearings on important issues, and what's sort of an acceptable way to have an outcome on an issue. And I think, and then the other problem is sometimes if there are 5 members, sometimes there are only 4 people coming, which isn't anybody's, bad action. But then when you have a possibility of just a 2-to-2 vote, or sometimes we've even had 3 people, we've got issues that are too important for that small a number of people to decide on. If we have a larger number, I think we may benefit from having more discussion among the council members in public. And I think that will benefit members of council and the public. So on net, you know, I think there's a benefit to moving from 5 to 7. The third one, as you know, is changing from odd years to even years. I think it would be good to have a cost estimate of what we would end up paying if we keep it on odd years. I am inclined to think it's a good idea to move to even years. And I guess I'm not going to go into
30
that anymore.
seconds remaining.
On the Evergreen property, I would say, I hope we don't end up with a 10-story building there, which is one of the things that was discussed the last time this issue was before here, that I had thought one of the ideas was take the site plan and have it be purchased from the second developer from the first developer, and then go with that plan, which we'd already really thought about, and that already had increased 1 floor. Going to 10 floors is really quite different from what we've all been thinking about there for a long time. So I hope that doesn't happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeffrey, Trowbridge Road.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for the few minutes that I'm going to take of your time. You'll recall last week I appeared before council to discuss Trowbridge Road traffic as it was related to the amendment to the Starbucks special use permit. And I pointed out that that traffic study, like a lot of other traffic studies that have taken place on Trowbridge, have taken place in isolation without any consideration of anything else that's going on Trowbridge Road. I was at an MSU webinar today to talk about, actually yesterday, to talk about the Student Recreation and Wellness Center and the construction project that's ongoing there. And they announced at this webinar that all the construction traffic for that construction is going to be on Trowbridge Road in Harrison and through 2026. And I pointed out to them that that could be problematic given all the other traffic that's going on with MDOT's use of Trowbridge as a detour and all the other associated construction going on US 127. And after being somewhat strident about that at the webinar, I did get a call back from the Assistant Vice President for Community Relations asking if I would be willing to help her set up a conversation with the MSU traffic engineer and, unfortunately, Ron from DPW to discuss potential opportunities to change that. But what it really shows me and why I'm here today to talk about that is here it is again, another isolated view of what's going on Trowbridge Road without looking at any of the other issues that are going on there and how they may impact each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Parker, Music and Festivals.
Real quick before I start, this is my first time I've ever done anything related to this. I've never been to a city council meeting in my life. So thank you. So after I kind of say my speech, is there like time to get rebuttal, or do you guys just talk about it afterward, or how does it work?
We typically won't rebut. You just can kind of,
Okay.
It's one way.
Okay, all right, sounds good. All right, well, my name is Parker Knapp. I'm originally from Charlevoix, Michigan. I went to college in Northwestern Michigan College in Traverse City, and then I came down here from Michigan State, graduated from Michigan State, and now I live here permanently. And so I work in the music industry, and I have been traveling around for quite a while now, going to other college towns, my girlfriend now lives down in the South. She goes to NC State, so I've been, did a whole road trip just recently. And the one thing that I realized quickly getting into the music industry here is that there isn't a music industry here whatsoever. Every single bar that we have downtown East Lansing does not have anything to do with entertainment, honestly. It's just hubs for drinking. And there's a big difference between a bar and a venue that I've realized. A bar is just a place where people gather to drink. A venue is a use for tourism, because now you have a name that's coming through town where a bunch of people want to go and check out that particular person, right? And so what I'm kind of coming across is I work for Urban Beat in Old Town. I set up festivals. I'm doing Pride Fest, Damn Jam. I just did Rootstock. I mean, I am very much in this scene, and I don't see a single kid 20 to 30 that is at these events. I mean, the music that's being played is, honestly very old. And, we just, like Rootstock, we just had a festival downtown, and there was almost, I did not see a single MSU student. And it was right next to all these college, these housing. So it doesn't make any sense to me why that exists. And I've dived into, I tried to get Harper's to, work with me on setting up music. There is just no one who cares. I mean, I've worked with Max Bar on shows. I've worked with The Junction. MSU students don't want to go out to Lansing. They want to stay downtown Elbert, downtown Grand River. And I think, honestly, what I want to make apparent is these students, you might think, are crazy and love to drink, but they are forced, almost, in a sense, to go down there and have a good time, because that is the only thing that they have available to them. All they can do is go to Harper's or Rick's and drink. And so you're creating a culture where these kids, I go downtown and I ask, hey, what would you love to see in East Lansing? I'd love to see a movie theater, axe throwing, what High Caliber has, but downtown, or the new Zap Zone that they're going to put downtown Lansing, or not downtown, West Side Lansing in the mall. I mean, that would be lovely to see here. And I guess what I'm asking for, or I need help with, is I would love to be the person who sets up festivals downtown East Lansing, or potentially at Michigan State. I know you guys don't have too much affiliation with that. From what I understand, they're like their own thing. But yeah, I guess I came here because I wanted to make aware that when I go to college towns like Ann Arbor and I see that they have an amazing summer festival and all the the U of M students are still down there, having a good time listening to live music, and I see Blind Pig in Ann Arbor has a proper music venue where it attracts people from all over. I mean, I went to Madison, Wisconsin. It was the same thing. They have a lovely downtown with multiple venues, movie theaters, and other things to do just other than drinking. Just went down to Athens, Georgia, home of University of Georgia, and it's the same thing. They got comedy clubs, they got venues, they got parks. I mean, it's festivals, everything. And I just don't see any of that here. And I really don't understand why, Prime isn't coming back. Common Ground hasn't been a thing for a couple years, and I understand that Scott Bell is working on Hall 224 downtown Lansing, but again, I think that misses the mark. Downtown Lansing is its own thing. Students don't want to go down there. Students want to stay around East Lansing, and
30 seconds
there's nothing around here. So I guess again, what I'm asking for is, I need some sort of guidance, or I would like to see a push for somebody to take over the art, music side of things, because I don't see the students really showing up for it. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. Thank you.
Thank you. David, PK Convexity.
David Pearson on behalf of Convexity Properties. Couple things. I guess you have all of the material, including the draft agreements in their full form. I think you've seen them before. the couple things that I wanted to add. One is I should mention, because of the earlier comment, there is an approved site plan for the site. The site plan included the Abbott, the Graduate Hotel, and Building C. And that has been revised, but that can't change unless it goes back through the Planning Commission and City Council. So in terms of any changes to that development, regardless of what might be in the development agreement, you control that. You haven't signed off on any changes to that development. The focus, we think, should be on the affordable housing, because the whole point of the agreement with PK was, in fact, to get someone on board who will do the affordable housing. The question has come up several times on the option agreement and the $1.5 million price in the option agreement. That number, by the way, has a history. That was the price that was negotiated back when the city was looking at acquiring it directly through a brownfield amendment, and was a number that was intended to pay back Convexity for the costs that it had for the demolition of the old property that was the old apartments that were there previously, which included fairly extensive abatement and some other cleanup, along with other infrastructure costs and some portion of the cost for acquisition, frankly, that they paid for the property when they bought it after Chappelle foreclosure. I just wanted to explain some of that background to it. Otherwise, I think I've talked to you about our part of the agreement. I'm here glad to answer questions if they come up in your discussion, and we'll stay for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz?
Liz Schweitzer. I've been a resident of East Lansing for 55 years. I served 12 of those years on the East Lansing City Council, the last 4 of them as mayor. This is not the time to take on charter amendments that have never been discussed in our community. Given the huge loss of longtime experienced city staff in recent months, I believe your focus should be on rebuilding the confidence that this community has lost in its leadership. Your lack of explaining your new direction is extremely troublesome. The incredible number of staff vacancies must be of concern to you as it is to the rest of us. I strongly suggest you spend your energies as a council getting out into the community to invite comment from the many who are expressing their strong disillusionment in what we see as the disintegration of what we have built over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Bob Geyer, I live on Bailey Street. And once upon a time, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I was policy director for Michigan school boards, and a school board member down in that other place that has blue and funny colors. Back then, most school board elections were held in May as an off time that only had school board elections in play. It is true that low turnout elections like that, we typically got 4 to 6% for school board elections down in Ann Arbor, get somewhat more informed voters, right? They're highly engaged, they've been following things for a long time, and that's a piece. It is also true that it only turns out those people with the strongest feelings and those with the most self-interest. For over a decade down there, we had high schools with 30 portable classrooms sitting on lawns and kids shivering in them all winter long because our school board couldn't get it together to build a new school. One election would happen and the small school people would come in. The next election would happen and the big school people would come in and reverse it before things got going. That went back and forth because the election was controlled by small but vocal minorities on the edges. That story repeated itself for me with school boards across the state when I was working with Michigan school boards, and I was grateful when we finally went to November elections in a common space for schools. So while larger elections may get us somewhat less fluent and informed and engaged voters, what they also get us are representative voters. Those who don't have a strong personal interest in themselves or their particular kid, those who don't have, who aren't on the extremes on one side or the other, those who represent broader viewpoints, those who just want things to run professionally and well. My experience has been that councils and boards and communities are stronger when they have many voices and many folks that contribute, even those who are only engaged when they feel the need and only engaged when it's the election time and they have to go through each and every candidate. Some of the comments have been that we'll get more students to vote. Thank God. Our young Parker over here, who was so fluent and eloquent, described that other town that shall remain nameless. And the one thing that's true down there is that students stay. Because of the town being highly engaged, students stay, they grow the economy, they love the town, they build businesses, they bring families to the area. And Ann Arbor and the Ann Arbor environments have been have been growing throughout the years. Having lots of folks represented and the ability to vote is important to the town. I think it would make us stronger. I strongly support the charter amendments as proposed. I hope you move forward with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Rebecca Kaysen. I live at 933 Abbey Road. I came here tonight to encourage the City Council to move city elections to the even years. My understanding is that the primary fears about not moving it are about uninformed college students making arbitrary decisions or candidates focusing so much on the student vote that they're focusing on national issues that have nothing to do with East Lansing. It saddens me that members of our community have such poor opinions of college students. In preparation for tonight, I researched some studies. So I looked at Tufts Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, or CIRCLE. They said Gen Z is very politically aware. The top 3 issues are inflation, abortion, and jobs that pay a living wage. The council spends countless hours every year reviewing economic development plans. Those businesses will be hiring the students after graduation. These students do have a vested interest in our city. When I first registered to vote in 2002, 21 years ago, the path to being an informed voter was very different. There was information online, but not as accessible as now. I needed to read a local newspaper. I needed to actually talk to the local candidates to find stuff out. So I didn't vote in local elections, especially in the city that I went to college in. I just didn't know. But today it's different. Every student has a smartphone. Nearly every candidate has a website, a social media presence. All the students need to do is a quick Google search and they can figure out, does this candidate match my values? What are the issues? But by moving voting to the even years, it's not just about the student turnout. It will increase voter turnout across the city. Someone who was going to the polls to vote for president will look up the local candidates before going to the polls. And if anything, they're going to become more engaged once they learn about the importance of local elections. Local candidates would be foolish to run on an anti-Trump platform or on national issues with no impact. Voters of all ages are smarter than that. However, many national issues do have a local impact. The City Council can't reinstitute Roe v. Wade, but they can vote to ensure abortion access within the city limits. The City Council can't change federal immigration policies. They can, and did, declare East Lansing a sanctuary city, ensuring that undocumented persons can feel safer within our borders. We cannot be afraid of the youth vote. Young people are well-informed, politically aware, and will make our city a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Diane Gadaris, 1841 Bramble. Point, counterpoint. As a former council member, mayor, and citizen of East Lansing, I continue to stay engaged with your actions week to week. As you will find out yourselves when you're no longer on council, community members will continue to talk with you and ask you for explanations of what's going on in the city. Having sat where you are for 9 years, I know how helpful and important it is to have community support for the actions. But since public comment tonight comes before any rationale from council is out on these proposals to change the charter, I want to express my deep concerns. Changing the number of council members. I am opposed to that change. First, 5 members of council have been in place for a long time. It's worked. There hasn't been anything that's expressed a need and outpouring from the community to change this. And so until we find that there's a real need, why are we doing that? The city hasn't increased the boundaries, the population hasn't increased. But second, even more importantly right now, is changing the chapter of the charter without looking at the whole charter. This is not best practice. As it stands, the proposal has not considered the impact on the rest of the city charter. Yes, Chapter 3 designates the number of council members, but Chapter 4 governs how the city operates, and there are no changes proposed to Chapter 4 with this amendment. Chapter 4.7d states, quorum of council is 3 members. Chapter 4.8c, no ordinance can be passed except the affirmative vote of at least 3 members of council. Without additional changes to the charter, when this is put on the ballot, we are saying that a minority of elected officials can be a quorum to do city council business, and a minority of council members can adopt an ordinance. These are only 2 examples of additional changes that would need to be discussed and changed, and there are some additional ones as well. If we are going to consider changes to the city charter, a charter review committee should be put in place to make sure the entire charter is looked at. The second ballot proposal, is I'm opposed to the change as well for changing the date of the elections. When the city clerk, I know this will save money, but the Ingham County City Clerk wants to do it for convenience. I would say there's no reason for us to keep our election in even years, because what's important to East Lansing and what East Lansing has prided themselves on is to have a nonpartisan election. We don't run as a Democrat, Republican, etc. We talk about what our stance on issues are and what we want to do. We talk about our community. We campaign at a time when our community listens closely to the candidates for council because they are not inundated with all the stuff that goes on with national and state elections. Our choices for our leaders aren't buried at the end of the ballot. And that's what happens in even year elections. And I also don't want us to slide into being part of a partisan ballot that even year elections have become. That's not who we are. And at this time in our country, I'm not sure that that's where we want to be going. I want, and I would suspect, our East Lansing voters want the East Lansing race to be a priority for East Lansing voters. I believe the cost for doing that is well worth it. And I will add one additional consideration. It takes a huge commitment to run, as you all know. And you run because you want to serve the community. When you move the election to an even year election, I believe that in order to be heard, you will have to spend more money just to get your voice out there among all the other races that are going on. It's hard enough for good people to make the commitment to serve for 4 years and to raise money or then spend their own money to get their information out. Please don't put the additional barrier in front of good people who want to serve. And if you want to consider these changes, please put together a charter review team as we have had in the past. Do it with community input, careful review, and explanations. And please do not rush something as important as this during a 2-meeting review in the summer.
Thank you. public comment.
I'm Mark Krebner. I live at 615 Glenmore. I'm a 53-year resident of the city. I'm an attorney. I have a background that includes a little bit of election law, and I'm county commissioner. I've represented the MSU campus off and on for not quite 50 years now, 47 or something like that. I've been involved in registering students to vote on the MSU campus. It's not a vague thing. It was always very specifically students. And I've been involved since 1972, and I think I've personally registered, or through the drives I've run, I don't know, 50,000, 75,000 people to vote. Not so much in the last few years because we've got trouble getting into the dorms, but for 40 years I was a terror on the MSU campus. I am a pretty well-known advocate of easy access to the ballot. I really think that the standard we ought to set is that anybody who wants to vote, who is legally eligible, we should do everything we can as a city to make it easy to vote. It doesn't matter if they've got a good reason to vote or a bad reason, if they don't have much connection, if they've only lived here for 30 days, if they're legally eligible and they want to vote, they should be encouraged to vote. But the proposed amendment to switch to even-numbered years creates a practical situation that you ought to think about and that I have thought about a lot, okay? In fact, the name of the company I have owned and worked for many years is Practical Political Consulting, and I am a guy known for practicality. So here's the deal. I'm really in favor that if anybody wants to vote, we make it really easy. We encourage them. But this amendment will have the effect of trapping people into voting, and which is not that bad for them. I'm not even opposed to coercing people to vote a little bit, but it is going to dramatically affect the quality of the decision-making process in an election. Let me describe what you would do if you move to even-numbered years. Currently, as an odd-numbered election, odd-numbered November, we get 2, 3, 4, sometimes 500 students who are interested enough that they vote for any of a number of reasons. In the good old days, we used to get a couple thousand of them to vote, and I'd love to run drives that got that happening too. When there's an interesting city election, they do turn out. Not in huge numbers, but hundreds anyway. The problem is that, just to take the presidential election, where it's the most extreme, you're going to have in 2024 between 8,000 and 10,000 MSU students vote. They're going to vote not because they care about city election issues, because I can just tell you most of them do not, the great majority. They're going to vote because they are driven by their concerns about national politics. Now, not all of them, but take that 10,000 people out of, let's say, 20,000 votes cast. Those are both estimates, but they're not that bad. They're pretty accurate. 10,000 people voting are going to be between the age of 18 and 25, that's my guess. Half of them will have lived in the city less than a year. Well, actually, I'd say 14 months at that point. They'll either be in their freshman or sophomore year. 2,000 or 3,000 of them will literally have only lived in the city for 60 days at that point. Most of them will not be paying Lansing or East Lansing city taxes, and most of them will live, or at least half of them will live in areas that East Lansing ordinances do not apply because the university has its own code of ordinances and your ordinances are ousted from the campus. These people will vote anyway. If you trap them into voting, they will be given a ballot with approximately 40 issues on it. Not Secretary of State, Wayne State Board of Governors, Court of Appeals, District Court, Probate Court, Sheriff, Treasurer, Register of Deeds, and so on. A total of 40 items, but including City Council. They will do the best they can to vote. They will not vote intelligently or knowledgeably, and there will be no chance to campaign because there will be something like $1 million spent in East Lansing in 2024 by the campaigns. This is going to be a heavily targeted congressional seat, a U.S. Senate seat, and of course the presidency. It's going to be very loud and very noisy, and these people mostly are going to have no clue about city. And so they will vote, they will do the best they can, and you will have an electorate which consists, almost half of your voters will be people who are voting looking for a name that looks familiar or looks like somebody they'd like to vote for if they could just get what the name means. So anyway, I just urge that it's just a bad idea to move to even-numbered years. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment?
Hello, my name is Jacob Horner. I'm here with PK Companies. I live in Lansing, Michigan. I just wanted to say that I'm available for any questions that the council may have regarding 341 Evergreen and our involvement. So, thank you.
Thank you. Alice?
I just have questions from readers and from Eli reporters, so I thought I'd list them off in the hopes maybe you'd get to them tonight. Number one, the HRC voted last night to ask City Council to use its subpoena powers. To my knowledge, we've not seen that in recent history. Could the city attorney explain tonight what that would look like? How much of it will be visible to the public? Secondly, on parcel C, I think Mr. Pearson may have answered a little bit of this. The City Council changed direction with Convexity when it voted last year to try to buy the property. That presumably stopped Convexity from plans to develop the property on their own. Does that, plus the pandemic shutdown, slow down the clock in terms of the deadline Convexity faces? Could we get a specific deadline for what Convexity faces? 2B, the draft agreement with PK mentions retail, so that's a change of the site plan. Would having it in the contract obligate the City Council to approve it? 2C, would a site plan revision make the October deadline with MISHDA effectively impossible? 2D, has a member of the East Lansing City Council or staff sent a letter of support to MISHDA on this project, as happened with 530 Albert Avenue project from ACD? Third, on the 530 Albert Avenue project, a letter of support was sent to MISHDA that did not involve a discussion of council. Is this a new approach on the part of City Council in terms of formal expression of support for redevelopment projects? 4, on the question of the charter change with regard to the timing of the swearing in, is it, Chris Rood actually already asked this, is it possible to minimize the lame duck session by doing something like saying the swearing in would occur on the first Tuesday after the certification of the vote? 5, there is a petition effort for a charter change that includes suggesting that if there's a vacancy on City Council, the council be allowed to call for a special election. Is council considering anything similar? 6, the council hired an external attorney to look into allegations in an anonymous complaint. As critics have pointed out, there has been no transparency on the process, or we've not even been told what it entails, what's going on with the investigation, what is happening inside the investigation, and when will we know what it has involved and what has been found. 7, is there going to be a clear accounting soon of the ARPA fund plans? It would be helpful to know what the full breakdown is as we look at this question on the City Council agenda tonight. 8, could we get more detailed information about Sunday's Juneteenth celebration and the upcoming Pride celebration? There does not seem to be information on the city's website about this, and we'd like to distribute information. And finally, on art space, what's going on with that? Is there an issue with lacking city staff to get to the next stage of the project, or is art space pulling out? Because I know the City Council and the DDA committed funds to that, but we've not seen that moving forward. I thought of that project because we're talking about 530 Albert and we're talking about Building C, both of which are meant to be income-limited housing systems, and so art space was supposed to be the third, so I'm just curious what's happening with art space. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Anyone online, Tammy?
There are no callers in the queue.
Thank you. Next up, communication from council. Councilperson Garcia.
Nothing, Mayor.
Councilperson Brookover.
No, thank you.
Councilperson Watson.
No, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Craig.
I don't have anything tonight.
Yes, I'm up. Yeah, just to kind of address the big question. I really appreciate the conversation around the charter amendment and around students in this. I think it does kind of meet with one of the initial questions, kind of what the direction and what the thing is here with East Lansing. I think East Lansing is a couple things, and I think this is part of that conversation. We have to kind of step into our rightful place. The students of East Lansing not only delivered the state of Michigan, they also delivered the nation with their votes and their electorate and their priorities and their educational positions. I don't really fear the student vote, and I think they're far more knowledgeable than we give them credit for. And also the gentleman who stepped up to kind of, I think they continue to tell us. I think it's come up so many times. They're telling us kind of what they need. We talk about retaining top talent with the university. We talk about having these partnerships and doing all these different things, but we absolutely refuse to even look at or have conversations around what it means to be a Big Ten city, a leading city, what that means going into the future and what that's going to look like, and even how I think it's kind of what permeates a lot of our politics, and just that we're having conversations. We continue to tell ourselves who we are without really asking who we are to the people who consume our product every day. For the most part of this community, students are as big a consumer of East Lansing as any resident that lives here. And so it is a conversation that needs to be had. The students, I think we're probably a little biased, particularly myself and the Mayor Pro Tem. We sit with the University Student Commission. So I see they brought us more things that I wouldn't have even considered without them sitting there, and their priorities and their things. They're not small things. It's the environment. It's public safety. They have every single question that any adult has asked in this meeting. Some of them have asked better, in more poignant ways, and with the stats and the figures to back up every one of their opinions. So I'm not really afraid of the student. I'm definitely open to kind of looking at all these things. I think a lot of them, definitely from my perspective, cost is not the highest consideration. I think at this point we really should be considering maximum participation in the electorate. If someone was brave enough to work through an entire ballot and do those things, that person's committed to voting on that ballot. There's plenty of people who check either R or D or do the presidential piece and walk out of the election, much less what the student participation. I think we have to pivot here. The students are our greatest asset. The students differentiate us from other cities, and I think there's work to be done on that relationship. So that will be one of the differences. We will work differently with our student population. This is not adversarial. They need to be our partners. They have the ideas that are going to take us into the future. They know what's next, what's cool, what's going to create economic development, and it's important that we engage them and really start to listen to them from that perspective. And then as far as on the specifics, we'll definitely take guidance from the city clerk on things around the charter in respect to that, as well as Barb Byram's office, and making sure we're in alignment, particularly with that date. I think that date was something there, but I think if there's some research can be done, either the clerk or our media, I don't think we've been in compliance with this date before. I think we've certified elections. I think we're out of compliance with the way that it's set up right now with our date, but I think our clerk will maybe talk us through that as we get to that. So there's some other some things with those dates, and I'll address this as well when we get to the expansion of council. The impetus around this, I think we've been with that number. I'll give you a taste of what I'm going to kind of talk about on that piece. But the council was at 3 when we had members of council resign. We've had people out with health concerns, family concerns. We've been down under 3. We've had people had to come back from other obligations and do other things just to have a quorum in this cycle. If people were paying close attention, we've sat at 3 several times with this, and with people with serious things going on outside of that. So I think that's something to consider, and as well as people speak on concerns of overreach and other issues, I think anytime a council considers diffusing power, that should be something that is taken seriously and considered. A larger number does diffuse the power base and the opinions of a small group in a community. Though we're not growing, we have diverse issues. We sit in a series of neighborhoods. There's different issues in every neighborhood, like we see sidewalks, like we see whatever else. And that way we get we have an opportunity to have the full voice, and perhaps someday have a young person sit up here and actually get us straight with what needs to happen next for the community to be competitive into the future. But thanks for the opinions. That was one of my favorite communications from the audience that we've had here. So thank you very much for all the opinions. Next up, communication from the city manager.
I would simply like to invite our residents to attend the ribbon cutting for our new sports courts project with the new pickleball courts, and that would be at 2 p.m. on this Thursday at 2 p.m. at Patriarch Park. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, item 5.1, consideration of a resolution for American Rescue Plan Act employee retention bonus pay.
Brought back some additional information, and there were questions that were asked relative to the retention bonus proposal that was prepared at the last regular meeting. And the comments that we heard largely centered around getting additional information about how the actual amount was calculated. So we provided a memo that discusses that calculation, and also I think I'm trying to see if I put it here or in a prior discussion, just the rationale with the bonus being split into 2 6-month periods to try to get some immediate relief, and then also looking at going prospectively from July 1. And so we have staff here that are prepared to answer any additional questions that you might have regarding this. And of course, stated at the last meeting that this is not a complete or a single issue that will be directed at dealing with some of the retention concerns. There are other efforts that are also taking place.
Questions?
I do have a couple questions. Thank you for staff and Randy getting this additional documentation, and I very much appreciate that, and answers a lot of my questions. But I do have a question on the resolution, and maybe it's a city attorney question, but if you look at item number 1, subject to the availability of ARPA funds, the city will provide retention pay to all regular, non-contingent, full-time and part-time city employees retained by the city as of January 1st, 2023. And then if you look at item 3, retention bonus payments shall only be made to employees employed for an entire 6-month period of performance for each retention bonus payment period, January 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2023, and July 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2023. This actually gets back to a question I had when I submitted to all of you my alternative proposal, but I'm confused. I'm much in favor of this, but number 1 seems to suggest that you have to be employed by the city as of January 1st, 2023 in order to qualify for this bonus. And then item 3 seems to suggest that no, that's not exactly right. You could be working for July 1st through December 31st, 2023, not having been retained as of January 1st, 2023, and you would still be getting a bonus. So to me, there's something internally inconsistent there. And let me just say why I brought this up, because in the context of everything else that's been going on in the last 4 or 5 months in terms of attrition, the last thing in the world, totally apart from the unions, the last thing in the world I want is to implement this program and then have our non-union employees be having arguments about who gets what. That just So that's why I'm asking the question.
Well, I think it's, and I better understand your question here about that point. The intent was to allow each 6-month period to stand on its own, and I can see where that first item may give the impression that you must be there as of January 1st to also be eligible for the time period from July 1st through December 31st. So I'm sorry that was misunderstood, and I don't know if there's a friendly amendment or something that could be done there.
Well, you don't have to apologize. It's just a drafting thing. It has nothing to do with you, but I just...
Thank you.
Do you have an alternative wording to suggest, Mr. Rickover?
No, I don't.
I think if we just strike the language in paragraph number 1 that begins with retained and states retained by the city as of January 1, 2023, and end right there, then that would clear up that inconsistency.
I'm sorry, Tony, which paragraph are we looking at? Is this in the resolution?
It's on enumerated paragraph number 1 at the bottom of page 4 of 54.
And your suggestion was to just strike the word retained from the first sentence?
Retained by the city as of January 1, 2023.
Okay. Strike that whole.
Is that enough, or do you need to delineate that they're two separate more clearly?
Can I interrupt? This makes me nervous, trying to draft this at the table tonight. I'm in favor of this. I want to get it passed, but we have a meeting next week when we can pass it where our city attorney can look at it and make sure it's fine-tuned the way it should be. That's a suggestion.
It's a good suggestion. Let's send them out with the right guidance so they can come back with I think that's the most important part, that they come up with language they can kind of work through that in the public.
I have a question. For the city manager, since this was presented to us, have you heard additional feedback on the retention plan?
There was discussion, and I think there is optimism that within the work group that we would move forward with this proposal and that we would have some implementation. And so I can't say that there was anything formally discussed beyond that, other than I think that there was consensus that it could be beneficial, and they'd like to see it move forward.
I wanted to ask my other question that I emailed about. How can we understand if this helped? How can we see where we're at, where we've been, and if it stabilizes things to do this?
And I'm not sure if you had an opportunity, but I still think it's good to do that publicly. But of course, one of the things would be anecdotally seeing the effectiveness by the payouts and the buyouts, that number of people that are retained after the fact. But we could attempt to do some type of soft survey before to see if what the sentiments are of staff, that if this would help, and then also after the fact to see and measure if it actually did. I think it's challenging because we don't have a baseline. We don't have a baseline of we can look back at how many we lost in the last 6 months and see if that is if there are fewer lost in the next 6 months prospectively, but that still may not indicate all of the other variables that would impact this bonus decision. But one of the other things, and so we talked about the wage and the job study. I think one thing that has become very evident is looking at our job descriptions. I know Councilperson Brookover mentioned this earlier in the when I arrived, that many of those haven't been reviewed for some period of time, but then also some of our ability to compare wages, we haven't done that in a number of years. And so having a wage and job study will help also to see if there are if we are paying much less than some of our competing organizations, and that will, I think we have seen some anecdotal evidence of that, but I can't say for certain what's happening there.
Can I suggest we move to table item 6.1 until next week?
Do we know if that would change the date of the first payment? Is that still enough time to start these when we wanted to start them?
I think the only wild card there would be the ability to get letters of agreements with the bargaining groups. So we likely could from a payroll perspective, but there is also the need to go back and negotiate with the different labor groups for
We have
those.
5 different labor groups that need to be bargained with.
We have already sent the LOAs to them,
Okay.
so it is already in process.
Okay. I've just kind of read and reread the resolution. I'm comfortable with the suggested word change from the city attorney, which would change paragraph 1 on page 4 of 54 in our packet to, subject to the availability of ARPA funds, the city will provide retention pay to all regular, non-contingent, full-time and part-time city employees as follows. Well, excluding elected officials as follows. I think that clears up the confusion, and I'm comfortable voting on this. I guess that means I should make a motion. So I would move approval of policy resolution 2023-10.
Second. Further discussion?
Is that as amended?
As amended, yes.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tony.
Second. Any further discussion?
I did want to say some more about my interest in understanding the situation, the actual numbers situation. Just again, during the day, I work in public health, and when we submit proposals or resolutions or when we apply for grant, we have to back that up with percentages and numbers and amounts. And so it's hard for me to understand how to explain to someone that I supported something because we saw this percentage dip. We lost this number of employees. And so I guess I just hope to continue to have the conversation so that we can understand fully the landscape of the city staff.
Yeah, and I think per the city manager's points, I think just reporting this back is part of a comprehensive with next steps, and I think you expressed several next steps, and just rolling this back around and making that part of that conversation.
Could somebody just read me now the amended resolution, the sections were amended precisely?
Yep, it was just that one paragraph, so it's under the now therefore be it resolved, which is on my page 4 of 54. Paragraph 1, subject to the availability of ARPA funds, the city will provide retention pay to all regular, non-contingent, full-time and part-time city employees, excluding elected officials as follows.
And then the paragraph 3 on the next page stays the same?
Yes, to the extent that the intent is that any employee serving the entirety of the 6 months of the first 6 months of the calendar year, the second 6 months of the calendar year, subject to the other terms, then we would not change enumerated paragraph 3.
So an employee has to be employed for the entire 6-month period in order to be eligible for the bonus, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion?
Just wanted to echo Councilmember Watson's points that I think that, this is not the conclusion of this conversation. This is one step along the road, and that we need to continue to work on it. So, thanks.
And I'll button that up and just say thank you for digging into this. And I know that we made a commitment, employees first and that kind of thing. I like to put money behind stuff. I think it's important, and it sends an important message, and I thank you for the work on this, because I think it's important. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, discussion item 7.1, discussion of billing for hazardous sidewalk program.
Good evening, Council. Ron Lacoste, Acting Public Works Director. Wanted to follow up with a discussion on the sidewalk billing after some changes got made last year, and there was more discussion this year on how residents were billed. We do acknowledge that construction costs have gone up considerably since this program was first put into place back in 2000, and specifically the last few years, construction costs have really climbed, generating some sizable property owner bills. So we talked through this with the finance department and our engineering staff to try to come up with a billing scenario that would recognize what council was directing us to do, and still something that we could implement reasonably, both in engineering and finance. So what we propose is a 3-year payment cycle for everybody, with the option if somebody wants to pay their bill all in one lump sum, they can pay it all in that first bill, so they can always choose to pay it early. But everybody will be placed on the same 3-year cycle, just for consistency, so we don't have a bunch of exceptions. And then the dates below are kind of a typical how this would look to a resident, just to kind of lay it out so everybody understands, because it's not simply a 1-year or 3-year payment plan. There's dates that come into play with tax and everything else. So in a typical year, we would construct the sidewalk, we'd get final construction numbers, we'd calculate the bills, and we would typically send those out in January. And what we're proposing is a 90-day payment plan or 90-day due date on the original bill. With that being said, nothing would happen until that February 2025. So if bills went out January 2024, due in 90 days. If they didn't pay, they would simply get a reminder letter saying you haven't paid. It wouldn't be till February of 2025, which is 10 months after the due date, that they'd get the first formal notice that the bill is unpaid, and it may go on their summer tax bill, and a copy of that typical notice is included in the packet. If it still is not paid in March 2025, 11 months after the initial due date, you'd get a second formal notice, and then it wouldn't be till June of 2025 the unpaid balance would actually go on the summer tax bill, which would be due August 31st. September 2025, if they fail to pay their tax bill or a portion of their tax bill, that's when the first penalty would be assessed for non-payment, and then it wouldn't be till March of 26 that it would actually get turned over to the county for the start of their process, where there's significant penalties, in the subsequent foreclosure process. But again, that's on a larger tax bill, which this would become part of. So this gives the property owner 14 months to pay with the original invoice before being placed in their taxes, and 16 months to pay before a single additional fee is added. And that, again, is each bill of the 3-year cycle. So every subsequent bill would go through that same process. So that's kind of what we're laying out, and that's the timeline that residents would see on the bills.
I wanted to explain the urgency of bringing it back. We do understand that there could be subsequent conversations about doing this differently, but there are bills that are going out immediately and because of work that has been done. So we wanted to provide you with an explanation of what we would like to do for this current cycle, and also to avoid the potential if we expand it, for instance, to 5 years or other. There are other considerations, even with the 3-year option, because of the fact that the properties could sell during that 3-year timeline, and then who would be responsible for the tax bill or the invoice, and some of those different things that we had to consider as we're trying to come to some solution for the immediate cycle, recognizing that there may be discussions later about what our approach would be regarding to this. And so part of the conversation was that if we split it into 3 years, 3 equal payments, that if there was some tax repercussions, they wouldn't all come at one point in time, so that, again, if you had a buyer and for instance, you had a $9,000 sidewalk bill, it wouldn't suddenly move from one tax rate to a much larger tax rate as a result of non-payment or some other things. And so we heard the conversation that was held with council. We're trying to come with an immediate solution to deal with the notices that go out this year, recognizing that there may be some further conversations that have to happen down the road.
I don't know who exactly to direct this to, but if the properties change in hands, shouldn't it accelerate or become part of the transaction if it's moving?
I don't believe we have the ability to force that. It would have to be a disclosure issue during the transaction that there's remaining 1 year, 2 years of bills to come. We've already had that in the past, where we've notified that the special assessment's coming and the property sells before we actually do the construction and get the final bill. So that already happens now, that some of that occurs, and it'll happen more under this type of scenario. But it's something that we've dealt with in the past, and it's something the private parties will have to work out. I don't think we have the ability to force that due on sale.
And then I would also add that the property owners, if they get the work on their own, so this is only if the city performs the work, if the property owner were to get their own contractor and go to a monthly payment plan, they obviously could work those details out with their own contractors and have a different arrangement. But this is only for those that have elected to have the city perform the work that's required as well.
This might just be for my own curiosity, but do we have an idea of how many people are choosing to hire it out on their own, and how many are choosing the city contractor option?
Generally, only people that know contractors or have been the family typically are, because our scale is so much larger, they can't compete with our numbers. So typically, I would say less than 5 out of the group.
Percentage.
Very, very small number.
Okay, got it. That was kind of my perception, but.
May I make a comment? I appreciate the timeline that you created and that you thought of. It looks good. I was wondering about the bill, though. It's not clear to me that 300 is due out of 900. It doesn't let a person know that the full amount is 900 and they can pay 300 right now, or?
Yeah, the total due is that box at the bottom where it says total due with an arrow with 300 is bold. That's what's due, that invoice. And this top section is just a comment that lets them know that there's 2 more installments coming. And I even have a note for myself that I should have added on there that this is invoice 1 of 3. We'll add that as well to let them know. And then obviously 2 of 3 and 3 of 3 to help clarify that. But that's our intent.
I'm trying to remember, so is this a change to 3 years from 2 years?
The change to 3 years was actually proposed last year. So this is the current process. I don't think it had been laid out last year of exactly what going to that 1 or 3 years. So if it was a 1 year, what I laid out is the schedule. A 3 year just is the same schedule, just repeats itself.
You're just refining the paperwork and the billing, is that correct? Is that what you're proposing here?
What I'm laying out is so council understands exactly what the process is. Because we were talking about a 1 or 3 year billing schedule, and it's not truly a 1 or 3 year. The bill's going to be due in 90 days. However, this is the chain of events that happen before it goes on a tax bill. So it effectively gives them more than a year to pay before anything happens. And that's what I wanted to lay out, is so everybody understood how it was going to be viewed from a property owner who doesn't pay.
So you're not changing anything?
There was also a change, I think, that, and Brian, you correct me if I'm wrong, but previously, the letter would allow the resident to choose a 1 or 3 year option, but if they didn't choose, then it would default to, I'm not sure if it's the 1 or the 3 year. But now what we're proposing is just to remove that option and just make it a regular 3 year payment plan for tracking purposes and ease of recording that. However, they still have the ability to pay in advance if they choose to.
Or do we tell them that in this?
Yeah, if you look at the comment section on the bill, that's what that's intended to say, is please pay $900 if you wish to pay the entire balance with this invoice and avoid future invoices. So that's why that comment is on there. So they have that option to just pay it all at once.
Now, I had another question that arose in my own mind, after our conversation the last time, and maybe finance can answer this. So, if it just rolls over to their tax bill, can't they pay their tax bill and potentially get a deduction for their sidewalk repairs?
Hello, everyone. Andrea Smith, City Treasurer. I'm not sure what you mean by a deduction.
A tax deduction for their property taxes.
They wouldn't get a deduction. It would just be added to their property taxes in addition to the bill that they already owe.
And is it classified as a property tax at that point in time?
It's classified as a special assessment on their property tax, and yes, it can go to foreclosure process if any portion of their bill isn't paid.
Yeah, that's not my call.
Okay.
He's asking if you could get credit on a tax deduction for it.
I have a question.
Income tax?
Not like when you file your taxes, can you deduct a higher amount?
I don't know that answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we'd have to ask a tax professional on that.
Yeah.
Or a lawyer who doesn't know anything about taxes.
Why don't you can ask me when Birchham's going to get constructed again. I like that question. I can answer that one.
I'm guessing Mr. Pearson could answer that question, but he's not going to.
Councilperson Watts?
Is it going to default to 1 year or 3 years?
Everybody's getting a 3 year. Automatically, you'll have to choose to pay early.
Okay.
Any other questions?
When is Bircham getting constructed? Just kidding. It is exciting to see work getting done.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Next up, item 7.2, discussion of PK investment and convexity development agreements and draft pilot ordinance.
Good evening, Council. Tim Dempsey, Interim Director, Planning, Building, and Development. As you may recall, we were here on May 16th to talk a little bit about this project. I know not everybody was present at that meeting. So just as a quick overview, this is the property known as Building C in the Park District Redevelopment Project, formerly the 341, 345 Evergreen property. Convexity Properties received approval to initially in 2017 construct a 72-unit project that was going to be 5 stories, 1 story, 1 level of parking, and then 4 stories of residential. In 2019, that approval was modified to include 1 level of parking and 5 levels of residential for 99 units. They were working towards having a majority of those units be affordable units, running into issues with sort of moving that project forward. They have worked with PK companies on a purchase agreement for the site, PK companies being an experienced affordable housing developer. They have developed projects in East Lansing, including the Bailey Community Center redevelopment project that was the property owned by the City of East Lansing. So they have now entered into a purchase agreement, and both parties are seeking to get approvals for a number of agreements to move the project forward. PK is seeking to enter into a development agreement with the city that would give them 48 months to develop this project and get it off the ground in order to commence construction. They're also seeking what's known as a payment in lieu of taxes arrangement with the city, which is a percentage of the rents less the utility cost to tenants that they would pay, that reduces in effect reduces the tax liability that would be paid for the site and helps them secure the financing necessary for the project. They are seeking low-income housing tax credits through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority for the project, and potentially other financial support as well. So with that development agreement, there would also be they're proposing an option arrangement on the parcel. With the original development agreement with Convexity Properties, it was arranged such that if Convexity didn't develop the site within a certain time frame and went into default on that development, then this property could revert to the city, but the city would be restricted to utilizing that property for open space or parkland. What the PK development agreement would do would shift that and provide the city with a 6-month option after the time period where they might fail to proceed for development, where the city could purchase the property for $1.5 million, which is the same amount that they are purchasing the property from Convexity. So with that, PK has a proposed development agreement in front of you. There's a proposed pilot ordinance in front of you, and then there's also the termination of development agreement with Convexity. The termination agreement with Convexity would release them from any remaining obligations, which is primarily the last major obligation being the requirement to have diverse housing as part of their overall development project by providing housing other than market rate, which again would be affordable, senior housing, or any similar type housing is determined by City Council. So the agreements have been crafted, they're before you, and the direction during the last work session was to do that and bring that forward as well. I believe there's also a option agreement that has been finalized as well. It's not in your packet yet this evening, but it would specify terms of the city exercising its option for the property for $1.5 million, should that be necessary as we move down the road, if council chooses to pursue this direction. So with that, I'm here to answer questions. Obviously, the city attorney and his team has been working with the entities on the back and forth of the agreements. He's here to answer questions. And both Convexity and PK, as you are aware, stepped forward earlier, and they're both present to answer questions as well.
And as it relates to the option agreement that Mr. Dempsey just mentioned, I will have a slight amendment to the documents for next week. I'm going to incorporate it as an exhibit into the development agreement. The development agreement references the option agreement. I want to make it as an exhibit so that they're all, so that it becomes a part of that document.
I have a question. Tim, while you were speaking, you said senior or affordable housing. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's correct. The ordinance as it's written, it's a provision in the special use permit requirements for housing in the downtown. and it references housing, diverse types of housing that includes affordable, includes senior, owner-occupied, and then there's sort of a general catch-all category that's not really defined. We've never really seen a proposal to define what that is, but I suppose if somebody came up with something unique, that could potentially fall into that as well.
This is the first time I'm remembering hearing that it might be senior housing, and so.
Yeah, just to be clear here, it's affordable housing. It is not intended to be senior. Senior housing is just one of the types that would meet that provision in the development agreement.
I wanted to ask, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
One question for you, Jacob, because it came up just about the letters of support. Have you received any letters of support from council for this?
We have not. We've not requested.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilperson Garcia.
Yeah, you mentioned that the plan was 5 levels of residential and 1 level of parking. That level of parking is just for the residents. Is that sufficient for all of the?
The current plan has 34 parking spaces in it, so there's 99 units proposed. So it would provide not completely adequate parking. The remainder of the parking would have to come from the city's parking system. And that was part of the approved plan back in both 2017 and then the revised plan in 19.
And obviously, Tim, this came up before around this whole parking thing is getting exciting. With this project, and then obviously Abbott, and then MSU comes online, and then all it's kind of the conversation had inside the DDA. Parking study, parking
Right.
conversation broadly as there. I think we're at an inflection point with several different things taking place simultaneously, possibly.
Yeah, so the parking department has recently been wrapping up update to its master plan. So one of the things that they did some initial review of has been sort of parking capacity throughout the system. That's something that we're hoping to have the consultant speak to the DDA later this month. We can also present that plan to council at some point. Specific to this site, of course, there was a required sort of parking plan as part of redevelopment project at that time. But as we know, parking is a continually evolving issue in terms of who's using it and who wants to use permits. So I think between the master plan and other future development, it definitely merits, an ongoing examination. And I'm certain that the developer would, work with us as we sort of evaluate and potentially reevaluate what that means for this project.
I have another question for you, Jacob. I know that Convexity spoke earlier about a plan already being available, but just again, to my recollection, when you all were here last time, it sounded to me like you were opening up that maybe we'll take this plan, but maybe we'll have our own plan. And so did I hear that right? Or are you saying you're leaning into their plan as well as not building 10 stories or more?
Our first and foremost plan is to execute the plan that is currently in place and the drawings that are currently approved. Because of the nature of the tax credit program and how competitive it is, we may need to, if we fail to be successful in getting tax credits the first or second time out of the gate, we may have to make some changes to the plan in order to be the most competitive we could be. So we would have to come back to council at that time to amend, I believe, either the development agreement or the special use permit to allow for those changes. So no changes will be made without coming back in front of this body for an approval to, or an amendment to the development agreement, I believe.
At which point we owe you $1.5 million. Because you have at that point, you essentially are saying you can't do what you said you were going to do, and now you're coming back and saying you want to do something different, and in addition, if we don't want to do that, then we're on the hook for $1.5 million if we want to buy the site. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's correct, no. I
Okay.
believe the development agreement remains in place until it's terminated, at which point the option would kick in. So if we came back, we would be asking for an amendment to the development agreement. If that is not adopted, the development agreement would still remain in effect. The option would only come into play if the development agreement is terminated.
Yeah, and you're telling, if you come back, you're telling us you can't do the development agreement that you originally planned to do, correct?
What we'd be saying is that we would want to make some changes to the project in order to be the most competitive.
Okay, and to be the most competitive, the changes would be to add floors. Is that
Or reduce them. So one of the things that's a big driver for competitiveness is what's called credit efficiency. So the minimum amount of tax credits that we have to use gets us a better score. So what we have drawn right now is a 6-story building that has steel frame construction, which is not the most cost effective. If we had a building that was slightly different, that had wood frame construction, the cost would be significantly lower, and that may make the project more competitive. So there's a lot of different nuances to this that may support it being larger or smaller, and we just ask for the continued support of the council and flexibility in making those changes should they make sense. We of course will come in front of this body and justify why we would need those and make sure that you're in agreement with the revised plan.
I get all that. It's just that the negotiating posture is somewhat changed at that point in time.
The development agreement as drafted does include the project definition, which incorporates the old site plan, but I certainly see what you're saying, Councilman Brookover, and that is accurate. Under the current agreement with Convexity, which we would be terminating, the property would come back to the city subject to that limitation of use, which is as open space, right? And this allows us more control over it, but at a cost of $1.5 million, which is probably market rate or was market rate back at the time. And so I understand what you're saying is if they came back and said, we can't do it as proposed, we want to make it something different, which the council may not find palatable, for example, whatever the change might be, the option would be theoretically to take the change or to be obligated to pay the $1.5 million at the end to purchase.
I'm not trying to argue with you. I want the taxpayers of the city to understand what the deal is here, because the council's got to make a cost-benefit analysis here. But you're kind of upfront saying, well, I think Ms. Watson's sort of looking for some, I'm going to use the word guarantees as to what's going to happen or not happen there. And you're saying, yeah, we're going to try to do this, but things may change because the economy may change. And I understand that. I'm not getting in your face on that, but the reality is, but if we pass it, now we got now we got money and we got skin in the game.
I guess I would just say from our perspective, I completely understand where you're coming from. From our perspective, if we end up selling this property back to you for $1.5 million, we will have lost money. Yeah. Because we will have spent time and money trying to put together a project that would net us $0. Plus we have to pay taxes and interest on the land and the cost of financing.
Sir, I appreciate that. But the taxpayers will have also lost $1.5 million. So I'm not saying I'm not going to vote for it. I'm just saying it is what it is after all these years.
Well, I'll interject here. I think I always kind of view these economics a little bit different. The leverage was lost really a long time ago, and the opportunity cost is a lot of it's already spent. So it's like this is a remnant of a former project, correct? That wasn't completed. So from your side, you're explaining you have the investment, the drawings, this part and the other, and the time that was. I think we get wrapped around the dollar amount in a vacuum or something. This is the deal is what created this dilemma. We're dealing with it in the now, and we have to kind of keep that in context. It's a deal that wasn't executed per what people were asking for initially, right? In the old plan, the affordable was not built, right? So I think that's important as well, that we keep explaining. This is the hand we're dealt. We can do nothing. They can come back with a plan, or it's 1.5 million. I think that's the three things that are on the table, and if you do nothing, it reverts to green space in perpetuity, correct?
Correct.
All right. I think leverage was lost a long time ago. I'm just trying to be frank to the public that's out there listening, and we're not. We need to communicate the history of some of this stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for the city attorney. I'm looking at the ordinance, and section 7 of the ordinance. So as I understand this, essentially, in lieu of taxes, they pay 4% of the contract rents actually collected, correct?
That is the intention.
So we're riding with their collection process.
That is correct. That is the standard
Okay.
funding process.
And then in
for
section 7, it says notwithstanding section 5, the service charge to be paid each year in lieu of taxes for the part of the housing project that is tax exempt, which is occupied by other than low-income persons or families, shall be equal to the full amount of the taxes which would be paid on that portion of the housing project, et cetera. So do I interpret that to say that if there's a situation in which some of these units are not housing people that qualify as low-income persons or families, but are other than that, then the actual taxes are paid?
That's correct. That's the intention, and it's just a blanket because if they did seek alternate or changes to the site plan, that we would want to ensure that if it wasn't LMI housing, full tax amounts would be paid.
Okay, and can you remind us, what is the range of these percentages that exist in the city of East Lansing now in terms of these percentages on these tax deals? Do you recall?
I think we really range from 0 to 4%. The 0, though, let me explain that. So if we look at the Bailey Community Center, it was $100 per year for the low-income housing, but it's the full tax rate for the commercial space and the 5 market rate units. And that's essentially how this would play too, as the city attorney indicated, because there is the potential, I want to add, that they might have a few thousand square feet of commercial space in here. That would be taxed at market rate.
Okay, so 4% is the highest we've got in the city on any of these deals right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Questions? Seeing none. Thanks, Tim.
Welcome.
Next up. Scott, you guys want a quick bathroom break?
That might be good. What do we got left?
Yeah.
4?
A few things.
All the amendments and then.
Tammy, can we put 5 minutes on the clock for a quick break?
Stretch, chair yoga.
Welcome back. Next up, item 7.3, discussion of a resolution to propose an amendment to the charter to the City of East Lansing to change the swearing-in date for council members.
Good evening, Council. So the next three items on the agenda are all resolutions to propose amendments to the charter. The way that the Home Rule Cities Act works is that if there are discrete amendments proposed to the charter, they can be done by a resolution of council to put them before the voters. It won't change the charter. It would only put these items before the voters to have them determine if they would want to change the charter. If it is more than a discrete amendment such that it fundamentally changes the operation of the city, or city operations, I guess I would say, then it has to be done by a charter revision. The way that a charter revision is done is that that a charter revision commission would be proposed for the ballot by the council. It would then be elected, and they would have 3 years to do an actual revision. What we have here are charter amendments. The first one is to change the swearing-in date of council members, and this is something that I spoke with Ms. Wicks about and the mayor, and she can explain sort of the changes that brought forth this proposal.
Okay, Marie Wicks, interim city clerk for the City of East Lansing. So starting with the first proposed charter amendment, thank you for the background, Tony. So this one came from me, and this is a little bit of housekeeping, as I call it. Ms. Root correctly suggested that this is due to the changes in Proposal 2 that were passed by the voters in November, allowing for actually mandating now that ballots currently received by what are called MOVE voters, military and overseas civilians, we have to allow 6 days after the election for these ballots to come in by mail. They must be postmarked the election date. I anticipate at some point that will be broadened to accept most absentee ballots, but it's been a little confusing time here for clerks because currently legislation to authorize implementation of Prop 2 is moving through the House and Senate committees. So what this means then, the extended period for accepting ballots means that what we call the canvass of the election now is going to extend 30 days. I'll just take a moment to explain what the canvass is. So when we're done with our election, all of our really final results go to the county. Clerk Byram has two Republicans, 2 Democrats that go through every single precinct in Ingham County to make sure that we balance. If we're not balanced, we hear a lot about this in the news, so I just want to take this opportunity to provide a little information about what the canvass entails. So they'll make sure that everything is balanced. If something is not balanced, if a precinct isn't balanced, we have to have an explanation for that. So anyhow, that is a lengthy process, and if we are receiving ballots that come in, they're timely, but they're coming in late, postmarked election day, those have to be accepted. We have to sort of hand deliver those to the clerk for tabulation in addition to those precincts. So for that reason, the objective here is to just make sure that actually, I think the correct terminology is really not necessarily swearing in, but election of the mayor. So the election of the mayor occurs once these results have been certified. And I would add that in recent memory, I think we had a very close election, separation of maybe 1 or 2 votes. So it's very critical, obviously, that we have those final results before we are holding the election for mayor and then swearing in city council members. So with that, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Yep. So again, I understand the concerns about lame duck. So, certainly, again, the objective is to have the election of mayor and swearing in occur after certification. So I don't know if we want to modify language at all, but I will stay neutral on that, but that's the objective.
I had some questions about process, and I'm hoping that you can kind of
Sure.
think through this with
Absolutely.
me. So kind of considering comments from the audience and then also just kind of sitting with this on my own, I went back and looked at our last November 8th election, which wasn't certified until 13 days after the election so it was certified on the 21st. That did not include that new 6-day grace period. Do you anticipate that that would then make it even more difficult would that push it out? Probably not exactly 6 days, but.
Oh, so currently the law is that the election must be canvassed and certified within, I believe, a 14-day period. That
Okay.
certainly is going to extend now that we have
So
this.
now it's 30 days.
I believe the implementing legislation is still coming through still in committee, coming out of that into the full legislature, but I believe we're looking at 30 days.
Okay, so I'm just having heard Barb's opinions on certifying the election. I'm guessing that was a sprint to the finish to get it within that 14 days, to get it certified within 13 days last
100%,
time.
yes.
So probably if the canvas extends to 30 days, they're going to use all 30 days.
Yes, and let me also add that obviously we're talking through lots of implementing legislation. There is a possibility it's not a huge priority right now. I do consult with my successor/predecessor, Jennifer Schuster, who's doing good work now in the legislature, that we might have a statewide requirement of a swearing-in date that is the beginning of the year, but that's not a high priority right now. And so at this point, again, the objective is, I think, simply to make sure our swearing-in is occurring after the certification of the election.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, certainly the intent of this is not to create a lame duck session in East Lansing that would be, used for whatever it is. But just looking at that math that we kind of just went through, that means that the election wouldn't be certified until into December. December is a month where we usually only have 2 council meetings. So, I mean, we're talking about January, really. So I don't see any reason to change the proposed date that's in this amendment proposal, because it kind of seems like it's going to be pretty close to as soon as we can do it anyway.
And procedurally, let me add that the council does adopt at the beginning of the year their schedule of meetings. It's required, I believe. And
Yeah.
so that last meeting could be a meeting to thank outgoing council members and what have you. So if that is a concern, I believe the mayor and I had that discussion as well. That is something to consider, but
I also think it's kind of nice for somebody taking that office to have a little pause for breath to get their life in order before being sworn in. Kind of the change of pace between campaigning and serving is pretty abrupt. And so, yeah, we could maybe extend the onboarding process a little bit more gently to incoming council members would probably be appreciated. Okay. Yeah, thanks for talking through that with me.
No
That kind of
problem.
confirms what I was thinking about the timeline.
And this question was to the clerk or to the city attorney, and effectively, some people have stated that we're currently out of compliance. What does that mean with our current status quo? Is that correct, or is that just conjecture?
I could defer to Tony. I do know, I just counted, I think I'm going on 7 city council elections, either as clerk or a precinct chair. And so I think we simply had to make the adjustment where we've run into this time crunch with the canvas. And so I'm going to let you actually answer that. So
And I
we've
think
made the
that's right.
adjustment, but yeah.
The concern, it hasn't had negative ramifications, or it hasn't really played out, but the concern is that we would be required by charter to perform, the swearing in and the initiation of the new terms when using an uncertified election result. And that could really create problems if there was a circumstance where it was a very close election and we had to decide whether we were going to ignore our charter or ignore state law,
Or
essentially.
even if we had to do a recount, for example.
Sure.
So, yes.
Just so I can get it all the way straight. So we would be in conflict with state law, in a way. Or put our charter in direct is that?
Yes, we would not have a certified vote, which is what we need to swear people in.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
question. Can you define what people are talking about when they mention that lame duck?
I can only speculate because that had not occurred to me. So I'm going to reflect what has been said. So you asked a hot button question. I guess my understanding of the concern would be decision making with maybe a lack of accountability. My speculation purely. And so, but I did not. That was not an issue for me. But I've heard it raised, and that would be my understanding.
Okay. And that means possibly if someone lost their election, they would be with us until January 1st.
That would be correct.
Potentially for up to 6 if we decided to do 3 meetings in those.
Effectively 2 meetings, based on how the schedule likely would fall based on Jesse's calculation.
2 meetings?
Yeah.
I think it might be 3, but.
Maybe.
What are your thoughts if it was December 15th? And part of my logic is a lot of people take time off and city offices are closed, and so what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm here to support whatever decision that the council makes. I certainly would not object to that. I wouldn't see an issue with that. I would defer to my concern really is just being compliant with the law and whatever comfort level the council has with the other issues, which are more political. I would, but a very good question nonetheless, and then whatever the residents. But yeah, I would be fine with that.
Dana, I'm just looking at the way that the dates fall on this December. Obviously calendars are different, but right now our current charter schedule, I'll go back and check it on our meeting date, but I'm pretty sure we only have 2 meetings scheduled in December. They're on the 5th and the 12th.
Okay.
So even if we had a swearing in on the 15th, that person functionally isn't going to start their duties until January 9th, basically. So
Okay.
like we could certainly do it, but I just don't know that it would functionally accomplish anything other than having to have a special meeting for swearing in.
And I would suggest that somehow we find a way to make it a Tuesday unless anyone wants to meet on a different day. So the first Tuesday after certification or, the second Tuesday in December, what have you, but I would suggest keeping it at a Tuesday.
Well, the second Tuesday in December potentially could be within that 30-day canvas period, though, depending on how dates fall.
It could be
I'd
the
have
7th,
to look
yeah.
at it, but it's really darn close. And then we don't, because of the winter break holiday, we have, for the last 2 years, canceled the third, or not scheduled a third meeting in December because of the kids being off school and people traveling for the holiday and things like that. So it would mean putting a third December meeting back on the calendar, which puts it in during winter break for all of our local students. And I don't know, just seems like it might be nice to have a vacation before you took on your council seat.
Do we put this date that we're talking about in this amendment? Does it need to be in there, or do we have flexibility?
Yeah, so right now it's basically the first council meeting in January, I believe is how it's currently written.
So how the swearing in under the change would be the first Tuesday following the first January, or following January 1st of the calendar year following the election. We don't want it to, and that sounds like you couldn't make it any more complicated, but you don't want it to fall on New Year's Day. And
Right.
so on the chance that that January 1st would be Tuesday, you put it at the one following that. So it would be as late as the 7th.
I just want to add something really quickly, just general comments. The reason why this is before you this evening is that we have these deadlines and timelines, and so the language that will appear on the ballot has to be certified to the clerk in August, and then certified to the county clerk 2 days later, so that's in mid-August. But we, before doing so, have to submit this language for consideration to the governor and the attorney general's office for consideration. And so that's a 60-day requirement, and we're kind of abutting that at the moment. So that's why we're talking about it now.
If I'm correct, either city attorney or the clerk can correct me. We have a little latitude there. There's some.
Yeah, that's correct. I've been in touch with the Attorney General that does work on these typically, and I've done a lot of these previously. Typically, the Attorney General's office will turn it around in about 2 weeks, and these are not extremely detailed, so I'm not concerned if the council takes action on the 20th.
Would it make sense in the ballot language to say what the date is changing from?
I'm going to defer to.
Yeah, so how I wrote it, if you actually look at the first sentence, I wrote each of them to explain what it currently does and then how we changed it. So I noted currently the City of East Lansing Charter establishes that city council member terms of office begin the Tuesday following that city election, and then the next paragraph references the new swearing-in date.
Okay.
And it's not really possible for us to put any explanation in there about how it has to be that way, kind of. I mean, like.
We have word limitations, and
Yeah.
it gets really confusing anyway.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, okay. Because it's like, yeah, it'd be nice if it was known that there was a specific reason for it.
Well, what if it's said in November? What if a person didn't know, maybe they were coming to vote for the president and they just weren't clued in to what city election meant? Like, what if it said Tuesday following that city election in November to place them, anyone that might be confused?
City council election? You're being specific?
Yes. Or, I'm sorry, what?
Were you asking for more specific language in the?
Yeah, when they're voting yes or no, and they're reading it, and possibly reading it for the first time, and then they're reading city election in case they're just confused about what's happening. Or to be clear.
So to understand your question, if a voter were to, or if and when voters are looking at this in November of this year, it's just some specificity that this is exclusively referring to city council elections and not other types of elections.
I think sort of. So what I'm saying is, it says the exact date of January 1st in that second paragraph. So what if in the first paragraph it said Tuesday following that city election in November? What if someone's like, well, what city election? Is this something happening in it? I don't know. Just to be clear, because sometimes things happen in September.
Yeah, I think that would be a clarification on the first sentence that would still be within our permissible limitations on word numbers.
So just, sorry, I'm trying to be clear, Dana. So you're proposing changing the first sentence of the ballot language to read, currently the City of East Lansing Charter establishes that city council member terms of office begin. Oh, sorry. Currently, the City of East Lansing Charter establishes that city council member terms of office begin the Tuesday following the November city election.
That could be it. Or
That November city election, yeah.
or following that city election in November. But however, whatever you.
Okay. Yeah. Just kind of feeling wise, I don't know what it feels like
to sit next to someone for a period of time who's not going to be joining us, or like who wasn't elected back in. And so I just think about that part of it, but it just sounds like, I know it happens in other situations or with other, groups, but it makes sense that we need to do this change, and so love to see what the voters think.
Understood.
Questions?
Should the amendment be voted down, I think you addressed it, then that we still would be obligated under the state law proposal 2, right? But I'm just curious if, based on the questions that preceded that, if the electorate votes the charter amendment down, what happens?
Then we would we would continue to follow the charter until such time as it's in direct conflict with state law.
Questions? Thank you. I think you're staying put, so we're coming right back to
Okay.
you.
You can stand up and sit down if you want.
All right, next up, item 7.4, discussion of resolution to propose an amendment to the charter of the City of East Lansing to change the composition of City Council to 7 members.
Thank you, Council. So this would be amending provision 3.1 of the charter, which currently references that the City Council consists of 5 council members. And it further said, it references that will be changed to 7 and notes that the additional council members shall be elected at the next regular general November election. And Ms. Gutierrez did reference Charter Sections 4.7D and Charter Section 4.8 sub C. It's a very good catch. I certainly will look into whether those are directly contradictory, and if so, I will provide a slight amendment to this. The Home Rule Cities Act at MCL 117.21 sub 3 does require that we confine any charter amendment proposal to one subject. I would argue that this is certainly within one subject because it would otherwise, the alternative is that you would be forced to break them up. You can't break them up in a way that would create contradictory results or that wouldn't allow for business to the city to move forward. So as I referenced, the next step, if the council were to ask that this be moved forward, this would be sent to George Elworth in the Attorney General's office, and we would work through any concerns with him and his staff, whether this would potentially be in conflict with that provision by adding the other minor amendments as I just referenced to Chapter 4.
Well, are you saying you would not redraft this to include those other sections?
No, I will,
Oh,
and that
okay.
would be what you vote on. It would just, the only potential is that the Attorney General may have an issue if he determines that this, the Assistant Attorney General may have an issue if he determines this would be in violation in such that it spoke to more than one related proposition.
Okay, but you would be coming back to us with a amended
On the 20th, I will
ballot
have those
proposal
amendments
with those
present.
other sections included.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can speak kind of this original question. I think this was raised per Mayor Pro Tem during the time of the initial resignations, I think 21? In 21, with Aaron Stevens and Lisa Babcock, that council, and kind of that, the vulnerability that those resignations created for council and for quorum. And I think through our own process here, from kind of viewing this and seeing people will go through many different life-changing events for some of our members of this council and a few other councils, along with the need for excused absences, health and extended leaves have taken place, and all those things have kind of hit the last couple bodies in a way that's kind of unique, and I think has impacted outcomes with the count in the number, being right at quorum or just kind of teetering for some people, even making a lot of concessions to be present so we'd have quorum for some of these meetings. So I think that was a big perspective on being a little bit larger, and obviously still providing for broad representation of the broader community. And I think another thing that kind of is outside of council with this particular group and some of the other configurations of people who are a little bit busy, making sure we're able to have the ability to attend and participate in a lot of the external things that take place. And sometimes even with this 5-member group, we're not able to engage every part of what's going on, particularly in the community, or even things that really have come up. Sometimes one of us should be able to attend, and sometimes we just can't as a body. So it's come up a little bit there. I think
Member of commission liaison appointments.
Yeah.
A strain.
Yeah, better support for boards and commissions by narrowing the scope of members who want to specialize and kind of spread out the work of boards and commissions. And obviously for council, the strength of council is having broader expertise in different members from the community who bring different just capacities and different abilities. And I think as what we've seen as people have life changes and other things, some of their capacity is diminished over the course of a 4-year period to be as effective as possible. And I think this allows people to kind of ebb and flow and still participate in council, because I think that stuff, particularly around health and around just real lifestyle and life changes taking place that make people have to kind of change how they participate with council. And then I think effectively, obviously, we still want to make sure we're able to attract and have participation from a broad demographic of members from our community. I think those are kind of simple variables there. I think the former mayors raised great points on anything that affects the broader charter. I think that's something that has to be considered, but the actual number, I think, is effective. And I think anytime a council or any member of a political position is willing to, because for all intent and purposes, you are vacating power when you diffuse a body and make it larger. So, but I think that's a good thing. I think there's having broader debates, 4 votes for different things, and things like that. I think we've brushed up against quorum too many times, and probably sometimes the public couldn't even see it because people made some huge concessions to be present, to make sure everything worked and we could get some important votes made around this with things around family and other things taking place. So those were kind of some broad assessments of this number, and I think it's been really challenged ever since 21 with the resignations. I think that triggered a huge chain of events following that. So that was just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, I've sat on and presided over many of those 3 council member meetings. I don't know how many we've had, too many, and it's, I think what the public doesn't see is the way that we scramble on the agenda side of things to move things to times when we know that we'll have the full council. We take important things off the agenda because we don't want to risk having a 2-3 vote failure on things that really should have the weigh-in of the whole council. Not because we're trying to sway the outcome, but just because 3 people is too few to decide things. So fairly important issues that should have been more timely addressed have been pushed to accommodate absences. And it's not a great way to do business in the city. We need to keep the work moving forward. So many hands, et cetera.
Questions or comments?
I have a question about the ballot language, and that is, would it make sense to add in our population? you know, like composed of 5 members representing a population or population of approximately 47,000 or something like that. Like, would it make sense, just again, for the person that's coming in to exercise their right to vote and doesn't really know the issue, but it maybe helps them decide?
It's at the discretion of the council.
Councilperson, can you restate that just for me?
Yeah, what if it said, the ballot language, currently the City of East Lansing Charter establishes that the City Council be composed of 5 members for representing a population, City of East Lansing population of, 47,000 or something like that. Like, you know.
And you just,
Yeah.
that's for the voter to be informed
Yeah, like.
that lives in the city?
Yeah. If you were trying to make sense of it, would you wonder, well, why is this number increasing? Or does this make sense to me? But you know, maybe people don't, maybe they wouldn't decide with that knowledge, like. I don't know.
I don't have strong feelings either way. Well, I look forward to further discussion next time on this, and also just, you know, seeing the voters' thoughts on it, but also, yeah, giving them some background.
And I think definitely continue to root out the pros and the cons. I think through public discussion is good.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good conversation to be had, I think, at this time, and welcome it. Anything from the clerk or the?
I try to make the language as simple as possible, and I just don't want, or my concern initially in drafting it from, in adding the population would be that a voter may be confused by that to presume that the council makeup was legally bound by population, which is not accurate. I understand the intent.
Yeah.
But that it could create that additional confusion. Again, it's at the council's discretion. I don't think that the Attorney General would have, I think he would be fine with either one of them, the Assistant Attorney General that reviews these, but that would just be one thought.
Thank you. I you know, I understand that.
Under 3.1 there, just to clarify, so I can kind of understand the numbers here. The elected officers of the city shall be amended from 5 to 7 council members, all of whom shall be elected at city at large. Additional council members, so the additional 2, shall be elected at the next regular general November election, which be November 2025.
That was part of the complication of drafting the language for this charter amendment and the next one, because we also have the proposed potential
Right.
change
That's what I was
from
gonna-
odd to even,
Yep.
and so I had to put it in more general terms. So that would really be dependent upon the outcome of the vote on the change from odd to even if it were to be put on the ballot and determined by the voters.
So if the even year amendment failed, it would be in 2025. If the even year amendment succeeded, it would be in 2026.
Correct.
Okay.
And so right now, November 2023 is 3. That stays that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the additional 2 would be in the following one.
Mm-hmm. So it would be 4 and 3 instead of 3 and 2.
Okay. Yep.
I had a thought about Councilmember Watson's population wording, just to make it maybe a little, to include it, but to make it a little bit more obvious that it wasn't. So, yeah, no, I guess we couldn't. I was thinking, like, we could define the city of East Lansing in the first paragraph as a city with a population of X, so that it wasn't in the same paragraph as the change. So it'd say, like, currently the city of East Lansing, a city with a population of X, charter established, I don't know how to say it exactly, but moving it away from the change. I don't know if that's possible. If you can wordsmith that a little bit, maybe.
And I also want to say, I do understand what Mr. Chubb was saying about that the decision to have 5 members wasn't based on demographics, and so so I understand if it's not placed in there.
Okay.
Questions, comments? Thank you. Stay put, both of you. All right.
One more.
Yep. 7.5, discussion of a resolution to propose an amendment to the charter for the city of East Lansing to change even number election years.
Good evening, Council. This resolution is to propose an amendment to the charter, specifically Chapter 14.3, which currently notes that regular city election shall be held on the Tuesday succeeding the first Monday in a November in each odd-numbered year. This would be a change to even. There are 2 technicalities that additionally had to be adjusted for, is that this would become effective January 1, 2025, because otherwise it would be adopted in 23, and would therefore put a vote in 2024. We don't have a vote in 2024, so it would need to become effective January 1, 2025. And then additionally, under state law, we can't amend the charter in such a way that it would shorten the terms of elected members. And so the final sentence is, the terms of all elected officials that expire in 2025 are extended 1 year to the same date in the year 2026. So it would push those terms out an additional year to get everything into the even year cycle.
Bring this back to the city attorney, kind of spoken from public comment, that we kind of look across each change and see where it impacts other parts of the charter and make sure we have a broad understanding of intent versus impact.
Absolutely.
Kind of what's going to take place if anything else is impacted by.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly part of the bigger review by the Attorney General's office as well.
Clerk Wicks, on our odd-numbered elections, what else is on the ballot with City Council? It's just City Council? Occasionally, there's like a
millage or
I'm trying to think. I'm coming up on my 7th city council election. Yeah, once in a while, there's another question. The sale of land, things like that. So it does allow for that.
But-
And I'm just gonna answer questions, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna take a position.
Yeah.
So I will say that is an election date that allows for like a school to piggyback for simply the cost of the ink on paper. Because I've dealt with that before. So yeah, typically it is that. This year we will probably have charter amendments. We will also probably have petition initiative. Not gonna go into that right now.
So I guess when we host an election for a different agency, like for the county or for the federal election, then we are given some funds to assist with that.
Certainly, yes. So federal elections, statewide elections are reimbursed. Certain costs are reimbursable. There's a form that we turn into the Bureau of Elections. We will have, for example, the 9 days of early voting. We're looking for money in the budget to make as whole as possible communities because that 9 days of early voting is required. As to your special elections, so let's say we have a school election, we've had a couple that have piggybacked on a February primary, which we don't have anymore. We've had a standalone, they would reimburse the city certain costs that are reimbursable. So overtime, election inspectors, and so on, straight time for regular employees would not be reimbursable. Sorry, I've had experience in this.
Yeah.
So yes.
No, you're quite expert in it, so I trust your, so anyway, how much does it cost us to host those special elections?
So a special election, in the past, I'm gonna go with school elections, probably between $35,000 and $45,000. And I will say that the amazing Jennifer Schuster did put together some information, I think at the request of the mayor. I found it today, so I apologize for the lateness, but I do have a breakdown also of an election, like just a regular city council election.
What does that run us?
About 60,000, if you want to pass that down as well. So I would say,
Can you provide Tammy with a copy of this to put on the agenda
I know
as
where
an
you were.
addition?
Yeah, absolutely. I have
Thank
this
you.
information and I will provide it. I really found it today. So I don't think it will ever exceed this amount because of Prop 2 and allowing for people to now vote absentee literally in perpetuity. It also is going to allow us, I think the laws that are coming into effect with immediate effect will allow us to consolidate precincts, meaning we can have 5,000 voters instead of 3,000. I intend to use that as we're looking at voting absentee to really eliminate the need for precinct chairs and consolidate in that fashion. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I do think it is a little bit of a moving target, but I would say between 45 and 60 is a very fair estimate. And this came, I'm assuming, from 2021. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Questions?
Is there comments? I think maybe as we're moving forward inside the record, we can express any of these kind of financial impacts. I think some people, this is their primary issue on
Sure,
this.
yeah.
Some people not, but yeah, anything we can put together on the financial impact.
Yep.
Just some comments. I started thinking about the students and some of the things that the students have brought forward to City Council, and also some of the things that we've voted on that impacted the students. For example, they are renters, and there was an issue and concern with the leasing that they had to sign, and we made that decision on what was going to happen with it. And so I think when you're thinking about possibly people who live here and have lived here for a long time and should maybe be the only guiders of decisions, it's not thinking about all the decisions we make on council, even a year, that impact the students. And so you see their representation as different. They are representing their generation. They're exercising their right to vote as they should. but they also live here for a year, most of the time 4 years, maybe even more than that. And so being able to capture, giving them the opportunity to more deeply capture their thoughts on our city council makeup sounds like a great decision to me when I think about it.
I do have one just personal problem with one of Mr. Grebner's comments that I wanted to call out. He mentioned that students don't pay property taxes, which, first of all, I have a little bit of a problem with tying who pays property taxes to who has rights in East Lansing. Everyone has rights in East Lansing, whether you live here, work here, or are just driving through here. So I do not consider your property taxes when I'm trying to fairly legislate this community. But students pay more for the square footage that they occupy in this town than people who hold mortgages. And the rents that they pay go directly back to the property owners who do pay property taxes. We gain value from student residences and they pay for them. So it rubbed me the wrong way and I wanted to call it out, so.
And this is kind of unrelated, but not really related to the subject. And I think we pick and choose kind of when we want things that make us proud. I think when there was thousands of students standing outside of our city hall and at Michigan State and our staff and everyone's working the election staff and it's a weird dynamic. I think that this kind of helps settle some of that town gown thing. I think it's a strength, and I think we have to lean into the fact that it's a strength. Because I think we all took pride in how influential the students were in this election, the last election, and I think they're just getting started because this is their time. So I look forward to their input. I think we need to hear from them, and I think it's their time. So this is my impression. For questions or comments?
Yeah, I'll say this. I understand there's this theory that if we move into even numbered years, that's somehow going to be more inclusive in terms of what some people call the student vote. But the fact of the matter is students can vote right now in our city council elections, and it's probably easier for them to vote in the city council elections right now because of the odd years. Number two, we changed the primaries. There used to be a primary in, I think it was August, which the city council took away because the theory was that excluded students from that vote, thereby opening up student participation in the November election. And I'll have more comments on this the next time we talk about it. I appreciate what we have in the discussion. I didn't understand what the rationale was for this discussion. I guess I know now, but I just challenged the assumption, with all due respect, that somehow changing elections to even numbers of years is going to somehow increase student participation in the government. It will increase student voting for city council, but I don't think it'll increase the possibility or probability of a student sitting on this city council for a variety of reasons, which I'm still thinking about, but one will be these will be incredibly expensive elections. No student will be able to afford to run his or her own election. I think right now, the ballpark for an election for city council, if you're running a real election, is $10,000 to $15,000. That's multiplied by 3 from when it was maybe 15 years ago. If somebody's actually trying to, and I respect your comments about going on the phone and everything else, but the reality is, if somebody's really going to try to run a city council election at the end of a ballot that's a huge ballot in a even year, I suspect and predict that the cost of that election, minimal cost, would be $25,000. So not only will it drive out students, I think it will also drive out a lot of just regular volunteer citizens who might otherwise be interested in running for council. So I need to think about all these things until we have further discussions, but again, with all due respect, I challenge the assumption that we're doing something here that's going to benefit what we refer to as our student population.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to disparage the fear that I think it's actually the opposite. Like what a lot of people assume, there'll be some sweeping student engagement. I'm around a lot of students, the ones who are engaged to vote, and there's many who don't know anything on the ballot, don't vote president, don't vote governors, don't do any of that. We have a little bit more of an engaged and informed electorate. I just feel like it's a little bit different crowd. But you raise a good point on the cost of the election. I think that's potentially true. But I don't know. I must talk to a lot more of them. I just give them a lot of credit. I think they're cognizant of what they did, and I think watching, particularly Aaron Stevens' campaign, and how you can, if you choose to use a student electorate, you can muster a student electorate and get yourself elected if that's a constituency that you want to work with. So I think it creates an interesting dynamic. So.
In an odd-numbered year.
Yeah, so I only ran and raised for one campaign, so I don't completely understand why it would cost more for a person to run, because people, it's not like mailer costs increase, or does it mean you have to have even more campaign signs, or I don't understand why it would increase for the person running.
I think the assumption is you'll have to neutralize the uneducated voter who's voting on other issues like presidential and governor and other things like that, and offset that with the electorate. I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification. I think there's plenty of forums to engage the college if you feel like it's important. I think it's actually, I don't know, only where I can fit an excuse. I think that right now you don't have to engage them to win. I think if you had to engage them to win, the issues would be a little bit different, and some of these conversations would be different, and that young man might have his music festival, because there'd be other issues that you'd have to take in. And probably, like you mentioned at the beginning of this, that if you had to engage them more effectively in the electorate, that lease issue probably passes, because you're going to have to face them and answer to them in a little bit different way. So I think there's some of that's baked into this a little bit. I don't think people really want to answer to them, or just have them based on the decisions that we've made, making less informed. But I think many of a lot of electorate is uninformed. They wait to the last minute, or you ask your neighbor who you're voting for, who's your top three, or I think we're just.
I get a lot of calls on election.
Yeah, I think we're really underestimating the ability of our college people to think. I think a lot of our electorate is uninformed right up until the very end, and kind of seeing which way the wind's blowing and those kind of things. So I don't know. I think we got to give them a little bit more credit than that. But questions or comments? Thank you very much.
No problem. And I just wanted to mention that since Councilmember Brookover brought up eliminating the primary, I was kind of surprised. I'm a charter geek and an election geek, surprised by that too. So this was prepared, I'm assuming, at your request. It's just a little background of the last 20, 25 years on this issue. So I just wanted to provide you with that.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. That's a lot of work. Thank you.
Thanks to Jennifer.
Yeah. Item 7.6, discussion of a resolution in support of Friends of the East Lansing Senior naming request. East Lansing Seniors naming. All right, modesty.
I think we have attached the resolution that was presented by the Primetime Seniors that is asking that consideration would be given to naming the art studio, is it the art studio?
Yes,
yes,
yep,
the art
that's correct.
studio, yes. That after Kelly Arndt, that was the former Primetime Seniors Director, and recently retired. And I wanted to just say up front that I apologize for not bringing this forward immediately. There, I was acting under the old policy that had stated that an individual must be deceased. That policy change was made that allowed for this to be considered, before anything like that has happened. So for those that are or might be a part of the senior commission or that are online that might be listening, that was simply my error from having that, the former version of that policy. But
Questions or comments?
So, this is discussion, I guess, do we have to convene a naming committee, or is that just for parks and streets? We're just being asked if we support this?
I think under the existing policy, we have to convene what's called the ad hoc committee, which is, I think, the same thing you did for the Native American.
Yeah, for the park, yeah.
And you have to find a past mayor and
Some community members.
maybe we can draft Ms. Gaderis to be our past mayor on that committee. I think the mayor has to put that into, I don't have the policy in front of me, but that's my recollection. Mayor has to put that in action or get it going, and so I don't think we need to vote or anything like that.
Yes, I just, if we're discussing whether or not we support this idea, I think it's great. Kelly did a lot to expand the arts offerings, and I think that that would be a fitting thing to bear her name. So I'm in favor of moving forward with whatever the next step we need to do to move forward is.
Can we just ask the mayor to investigate that and get back to us at the next meeting maybe? And I think you just have to look at the policy, and then I think you've got to do something. So I can't remember what it is. Tony can check that.
Yeah. I'll kick it down the road to Tony, kind of what we did. Yeah.
I will forward the current policy, and I know that we had done that previously, but I didn't include it as an attachment and should have, but I'll make sure that I forward that to you.
Thanks for sitting through the whole meeting.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
No further questions or comments? No? We're there. Meeting adjourned.